wrong with these masks as long as we're aware of them, because we use them in that protective way, but we're using them in place of the real version of us. And what I've realised is when we work with people to take the mask off and they start showing up in an unmasked way, we release a level of brilliance that we've not seen before, because the person has more capacity to bring that brilliance to work rather than manage the mask, manage the version of them that they feel they must be in order to be accepted and belong.
Well, to begin with, you spent over a decade doing lean transformation at Lloyds Banking Group, delivering millions and cost reductions, then change management at Barclays, then strategy for a £500 million business at Compass Group. That's a very different origin story from most coaches. How does that operational background change the way you coach executives?
It's such an interesting question. You've done your homework, David. It has been a career that I feel really contributes to coaching, and I'll tell you for why. I think firstly, you're working with people. So, there's always the humans at the heart of every change program, whether that be a strategic one, target operating model design, or whether it's lean transformation, process driven. There's always a human in the mix. And the biggest part of my role really was about taking humans on that journey of transformation. And what I learned during that is that individuals react to and respond to change differently. They'll all go on the journey in a very individual way, and there are a whole heap of emotions that are wrapped up in that as well. And you really have to understand that as a change leader and help support people through that transition as much as you do actually make the outcome happen. So coaching became a part of my role, although it wasn't badged as coaching. It really was sort of leadership with a coaching style, taking people on that journey and helping them understand their responses and reactions to the change in a way that didn't make them feel alienated. And so that's the first part that I feel really helps me land where I am today. And then the second part for me has been about looking at transformation and coaching through the same lens. And what I learned about coaching early on is it very much focuses on moving forward for clients. So where are you now and where do you want to be? Just in the same way as we do in transformation. So we'll look at what's the current state and what's the future state and how do we get there. But there's a key step in transformational leadership, which is about understanding the root cause issues in the current state. And that for me is the bit that's always been missing in coaching. So it's all very well saying, where do you want to get to and let's close the gap. But if you don't understand the root cause challenges in the current state, you will repeat those challenges and those root cause issues as you move towards your future state. So for me in coaching, when I first set out to become a coach full time, it was very much about going back first to understand root causes and patterns of behavior to make sure that they don't get repeated as we build the future state. And so that's the lens really of bringing that transformational leadership into the coaching space. I've found both of those things really helpful.
Your husband's brain injury in 2021 became the catalyst for building Purseda 360 into a formal academy.
Yeah.
How did that experience change what you thought coaching could be?
It's interesting. I don't think it changed what I thought coaching could be, but I really think it became the catalyst for a legacy. And what I mean by that is I'd been coaching full time for about 4 years at the point when Martin's injury occurred. And Purseda 360 wasn't even a thing in my mind back then. Coaching executives in this rule breaking way that I did. And Martin had the injury and it completely changed the landscape of our lives for me, for my children, and for him. And at one point during that story, we were told that the most that I could hope for is that he would be able to make a cup of tea on his own. And so going from an executive man that he was to you'll be able to make a cup of tea and that's like the pinnacle of the future. I was in a fight, flight, freeze position, I think, of I'm going to be the only breadwinner. I need to really think about how I provide for my family if my husband can't help in that regard. And I need to build a life that is different to the one that we live now. And of course, when you're a coach and you're self-employed and you sell time for money, when you're in that situation, it really makes you think about, actually, is there something different that I need to do here? So the decision to build Purseda really came from that position. You might call it a desperation for how do I change the way that I work to become more effective? But then I quickly realized that there was a legacy piece here around, actually, time is short. I might not be here for very long. How do I make the most of every minute and really leave behind something that matters? And what I recognized was the work that I was doing with my executives in the coaching room was really making a difference, on a human level as well as a transformational one. And there was an opportunity for me to teach other people how to do that in the rule breaking way that I do. And so combining those two needs together, the need for provision for my family and the need for legacy, Purseda 360 was born out of that. And I've been growing that since then.
You've said that most executive coaching still runs on models from the 1980s. What specifically is wrong, and why has the industry been so slow to update?
I don't think there's anything wrong, first and foremost. I always think when you are challenging an industry, we also need to look for the things that are right with it. So there are many things about 1980s style coaching that still work. But I think there are some constraints around it which don't fit the world that we live in today. So to say that as a coach, you must stay in the non-directive style, when people that you're coaching are pushed for time, don't always have the capacity for higher levels of cognition, aren't often as regulated as we were in the 1980s because we've got more exposure to higher pressure. It means that keeping in that non-directive style can often mean that the client can't access the answers within them, even if they are there. And it also means that to get to an outcome can take a lot longer than it would if you shared some of your experiences based on work with other clients that you've had. And so what I wanted to bring in was, let's take what's good about the stuff from the 80s and before, things like trust equation, which is still an incredible model to apply, things from transactional analysis that are incredible to apply. But let's look at it through a different lens, a lens of where we are now as humans, the pressure that we have, and start to think about the coaching spectrum as a whole. So, how do we move in therapy? How do we move in coaching? How do we move in mentoring and consulting, and bring all of those aspects together into the coaching room so that we can meet our client where they're at, rather than staying within these guardrails of 1980s style coaching.
You talk about a pretending pandemic in organizations. Can you describe what that looks like in practice? Because I think a lot of leaders would say their culture is open and honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, most organizations that you speak to will say the same, and that's certainly what it says in the strategy documents. And I think it's definitely the intent of most organizations, but equally, we're all human. And humans wear masks. And what I mean by the pretending pandemic is to the extent to which people wear masks. And there are 4 of them in total that I've managed to derive. We have the perfectionist mask, which is all about reputation. So it's not about dotting I's and crossing T's. It's about protection of our reputation and seeking validation and praise in order to feel good enough. There are plenty of those in organizations. And then we have the people pleaser, and the people pleasers on a mission to make sure that they are approved of. And often that is of personal cost to them. So, they're the ones that will say yes to everything when they should be saying no. They're the ones that will work overtime. They're the ones that will hold the project together, because they need that approval from the people around them in order to feel validated. We have the persecutor of self, and the persecutor of self puts an awful lot of pressure on themselves to be everything to everyone, but that comes from a real shaky level of self-value, and they're often seeking sympathy from others in order to feel good about themselves. So if you feel sorry for me, then that takes the pressure off. And the persecutor of others, the final mask, needs compliance and control in order to feel safe. So they will dislike challenge, they rarely take accountability, and it's all coming from a place of self-protection. So there's nothing wrong with these masks as long as we're aware of them, because we use them in that protective way, but we're using them in place of the real version of us. And what I've realized is when we work with people to take the mask off and they start showing up in an unmasked way, we release a level of brilliance that we've not seen before, because the person has more capacity to bring that brilliance to work rather than manage the mask, manage the version of them that they feel they must be in order to be accepted and belong. Now, I know through the work that I've done that this is happening in every organization, whether it says that they're open on the strategy document or not. And the reason I say it's a pandemic is because it is happening to an extent that there's a real opportunity in organizations that if they tackle this, they would actually get an uplift in performance and a reduction in things like burnout, where people are working so hard to be everything to everyone that they are driving themselves to the edge of burnout.
There's a silent middle you describe in companies, people
Yeah.
who aren't in crisis, who are performing but are slowly eroding.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's a hard problem to detect. How do you surface it?
It is hard. I think we surface it through coaching. We surface it through observation and through helping people understand, the leaders in the organization understand what to look for. Oftentimes with the silent middle, they're not the people who are on the edge of needing mental health support, for example. So they're not going to be the ones that are phoning in sick, or taking time off. In fact, they're going to be the opposite. They're going to be the ones that are holding everything together and performing. But at the weekend, they've got nothing left. Their relationships at home aren't working effectively, and they are on the edge all the time of burnout. To detect it, we need to accept, number one, that it exists. And then from that acceptance that it exists, we need to start to explore it with an open mind. And the exploration allows people to talk about their mask wearing and the cost that comes with it, and actually just start to have some honest conversations. I often find when I share stories about mask wearing, people go, "Oh yeah, I do that too. Does everybody do that? I didn't realize everybody did that. I thought it was just me." And it was the same, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we start talking about imposter syndrome and people go, "Oh yeah, I do that. I didn't think everybody else did." We need to do the same with masking. We need to bring it to the surface through exploration and make it okay to talk about.
I agree. You've trained coaches in addition to coaching, and that's a slightly different business. What made you decide to build the academy rather than just scale a coaching practice?
Well, I think that came off the back of the decision I was talking about earlier with Martin's brain injury. So Purseda was born then, and I really wanted to take the method that I use, which does break all of the rules of coaching, and start to show other coaches how they do that. But at the same time, challenge the accrediting bodies to move forward in their thinking and make sure that we could offer quality coach training across the whole of the coaching spectrum in a way that helps us work with executives and anybody in a more thought-provoking way. So using the past to inform the present and the future. That for me was kind of the mission from the start, and I've been taking coaches through that training with huge ripple effect in terms of the outcomes outcomes that clients are driving for their clients. So it's definitely been worthwhile. But I think the thing for me that's most important is that we start to recognize that coaches are out there breaking the rules themselves. And they're recognizing that the training that they have in traditional style coaching is not enough to work with people today. And so they start to cobble together different ways of working. They might go on an NLP course here or a transactional analysis course over there. And then they start to piece things together in not necessarily the best way for their clients, and everybody's breaking the rules anyway. So why don't we do that in a way that has ethics and quality and accreditation behind it?
You've got Cambridge, King's College London, and you're pursuing a doctorate in coaching. And additionally, you've founded a national coaching conference with the Wards. So you clearly care about standards. How bad is the credentialing problem in coaching right now? And does the industry have the will to fix it?
I think it's bad. I never say that anything is bad. I think it has a problem at the moment with staying on the front foot. So my experience of working with the accrediting bodies is that they're still operating in a style that probably was okay 10 years ago, but isn't necessarily now. So the lead times to make decisions take weeks and weeks and weeks to get programs signed off. They still work in a very paper-based way. So, you're having to sort of fill in paper forms rather than use online ways of working. And their ethics, although some of them are changing in the last sort of 6 months, the ethics have stayed the same for many, many years without being challenged. And so there's just a need, I feel, across the board with all of the accrediting bodies to look at it through the lens of the coach, number one, and to start to make the differences and the changes that are required to bring it up to date. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is how do we accredit coaches ethically and successfully without expecting them to record their clients? Because if there's one thing I know about masking, if you tell a client that you're going to record a session that is going to be then seen by somebody else in order to make the accreditation happen, they will self-edit during that session. And if we are about unmasking clients and asking them to tap into their real self, having a recording as part of the credentialing process is not, in my mind, a good idea. So we need to find other ways to do that in a way that upholds the quality, but doesn't compromise the coach's client.
That makes a lot of sense. You integrate psychology, neuroscience, and therapeutic techniques into your training methodology. How do you do that responsibly without crossing into therapy?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid and important point. We have counselling, and counselling is an important modality that is needed for people who need access to talking therapies, and we're not that. When we are working in a therapeutic way, we are doing so with an eye on the future, and there's some principles around it. So number one, we're working with people in the silent middle. So they are high performing, high functioning individuals who don't need access to mental health provision. And then number two, we don't work with people who have registered chronic trauma in their history. And so part of our onboarding process is to check that. If you've been in a situation where you have had chronic trauma and there's sort of a list of what those things are, then we wouldn't be working with you in those areas through the therapeutic modalities. And we're really clear about that because this is coaching rather than therapy. But each coach is encouraged to have a board of people around them that they can refer out to. So if somebody did come and they'd got chronic trauma and they needed help from a psychologist, let's say, then we refer out to that person. Then we can remain ethical.
When you were running lean programs and change management, were you already noticing the silent mode you now describe? or did you only see it once you stepped out of that world?
I think I noticed it back then, the silent middle, but I didn't have the awareness that I have now. So I certainly was aware of being in it myself. Bless you. I was certainly aware of it, but I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know the science behind it. I just knew that I was surrounded by people who were under pressure and having to be the swimming swan. I used to call it the swimming swan.
Mhm.
Sort of the more that you work and the higher up in the organizations I got, the more I would see that. And there would be this sort of pretense in the boardroom, and then outside of that, the corridor conversations where the truth would come out about how people were really feeling. And never the two shall meet. So, we'd have the real versions in small pockets, but the mass version would show up where it mattered and where it was being judged. I didn't know what that was about back then. With the lens that I have now, I do.
If you were advising a company that wanted to bring coaching in for its leadership team, what should they look for in a coach? And what's the biggest red flag?
I think there's two things here. So I would suggest bringing coaching in to work with your team one-to-one. And if you're doing that, for me, the most important thing is to trust the coach to do their job and not to expect triangulation. And by that, I mean, don't expect your coach that you're hiring to feed back to you about the person that they're coaching. Because if there is any way to erode trust, that is it. And you won't have a real version of your coachee in front of you. They will self-edit based on the fact you're reporting back. So I think that's really important. In terms of red flags for the coach, one of the things that often happens if somebody has been sent to you for coaching is that there's some work to do to establish trust between you and the coachee. And again, I think in the first session, it's really important that they understand that you're not going to do the report back. So I think organizations can definitely work in that part, bringing in coaches to work with their people. And ideally, and some people would disagree with this, but not the same coach for each member of the leadership team, because that causes challenges with trust too. So if you've got a coach and you know that they're working with your peers, then that creates a level of self-editing that we don't want. I think there's another part though as well, which is about coaching, or you might call it training leaders to be coaches in their style, so that we can move away from tell style of leadership, very directive style of leadership, and into a more regulated version, which understands the regulation of others and the behavior of others. And that then really starts to help leaders understand the intent of their people, the behavior of their people. And when they're not okay, they'll notice that.
How do you think about measuring whether coaching is actually working? Because ROI in coaching is one of the hardest things to pin down.
Oh, do you know, I just love this question, David. And it's really difficult because I've spent my career measuring benefits in lean and transformation, and everything needed to flow through to the bottom line, and you had to be able to show the connectivity between the two. And the truth is, with coaching, you just can't do that. I haven't met a person yet who is able to pinpoint the outcome of coaching in terms of pound notes. And I think we shouldn't. I really think there's space in every organization to develop their people, because developing their people is the right thing to do. And, from an ethical point of view and from the cultural aspect of the business, it's an investment in your people that makes them better, makes them happier, makes them more willing or unwilling, because sometimes that's an outcome too, to come to work and to do the best job that they can. So I think for me, it's less, the question is less about what's the return on investment, and it's more about what's the cost of not doing it. And that cost will show up in many different areas of the business. It's a difficult one, David. I don't know what the answer is.
No one seems to. That was a good answer as any. Tell me about the Blue Light Bursary. you're giving coaches access to people in frontline, high pressure roles. What made you build that into the conference rather than keeping it as a separate initiative?
Yeah, I mean, the conference exists because of the Blue Light Bursary. So, where this started was during my husband's brain injury, I had lots of support from blue light leavers, blue light people. So, those in the NHS, those in the police, those in the ambulance service. And what I noticed during all of that time was just how exhausted they were. Number one, this is in the UK and off the back of COVID. But also just how wonderful their skills were. And I wanted to do something to give back. So I had an idea of offering training that would help those people to retrain in coaching and utilize all of the skills that they have, but in a different career. So I started to do that myself and I was funding those places myself. And then I thought, how do I make this bigger? So the conference felt like a good idea, a way of putting on a day for coaches, wrapping it up with the awards as well so that we could recognize great coaching. But then also having this purpose behind it. So that's what I decided to do. And the idea of the conference is that it raises money to fund the bursary places for the next year so that we can offer more opportunities to more people.
Brilliant. You host the Leader Unmasked. What's a question you ask your guests that you wish someone would ask you?
Now, you're going to ask me this question now, then, aren't you?
We'll,
What would
we'll
I ask?
see.
I tend to in on the Leader Unmasked, we tend to talk about the moment that you recognize that you were masking in the first place. And for some people, that's really difficult to uncover because you need to do it subconsciously. But for other people, they know what that is. And I guess that would be the question I would ask of me is when did the masking start? And then when did you take the mask off? Because there's always a beginning and an end point that I'm interested in.
Yeah, that awareness it takes time to develop. It takes guidance, I think. If you look at the withdrawal from touching something hot, it's autonomic. It's very quick. You don't think about why am I doing this? But oftentimes, I think that the mask is about serving an underlying need or an unmet desire. And so when you realize that, you know, there's this connection and you can kind of maybe alignment, almost like a chiropractic kind of adjustment. It really opens up your world. And I've found coaching to be just transformative. When you have an aligned coach and you have a good match there, it's almost like I don't know if you saw the Wizard of Oz, but it's like black and white, and then all of a sudden it turns into color. It's a
Oh,
little bit
yeah.
like that, where it's
Yeah.
like this new dimension has just entered the frame.
Yeah, that's such a lovely way of putting it. And I like to link it to congruence. I love that word. I think we need more congruence in coaching between coach and coachee. But equally, I think one of the things I do every day before I go to bed is ask myself how congruent I've been during the day with the real version of me. And when has the mask gone on because I'm still human? And what created the desire to put the mask on? So often for me, it's about needing approval. That's my story from 4-year-old Angela and where that started. And so I'm looking for moments during the working day when that's come up and what was it? And sometimes that might be I'm with someone in hierarchy and I kind of revert back into little girl and I need to understand that. But that question every evening about have I been congruent really helps me reflect and draw on and then take steps to move away from that in future.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned there's 4 different types of masks. And if you think of a combination lock with 4 digits, there's a surprising number of permutations. And so it can seem like the world is a lot more complex. But really, when you break it down, it could be that, like, mask A meets mask C meets mask B, etc. And then you start to notice as you do this kind of work and awareness that, like you mentioned, we're all wearing masks at different times. And
Yeah.
sometimes perhaps it's acceptable, if not even preferable. You might dress up to go to an event, you might
Yeah.
hold back on a true statement. But uh, kind of having a little bit of awareness as to like what degree and whether or not that's how you want to show up and whether or not the foundation is being met, I think is vital for at least optimizing one's own life, if not an organization. So
Yeah,
I
it's so
applaud the
true.
work you're doing. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't get to touch on?
I think just that point that you've just made there was so beautiful about the awareness, because I think the awareness gives us choice. And you're right, there are times when we might choose to put on a mask. I often work with people who talk about family dynamics, and, we might have done lots of work to unmask, and they might be going to work as a more authentic version of them. But when they go back home to see their parents, for example, it's easier for them to wear the mask that they've always worn than to deal with the fallout of them being the real version of them. But I always say, if it's a conscious choice we're making, rather than the subconscious one and it's just happening to us, then that gives us that empowered position. We're choosing to do that for harmony or whatever value we're choosing first. And that makes it okay. I think it's when we're just going about it on autopilot, that's when we have the challenge.
Well, you brought up earlier about coaching and organizations and the cost of inaction or the cost
Mm,
of sustaining the status quo. I think for many of us, we're unaware of that in our own lives. And so, what is the cost of continuing to wear the mask, for example? I don't think we've really calculated that. So, just having that awareness and maybe experimenting in times might be helpful in expanding
yes.
our perspective.
Yeah, and it's just so wonderful when you take
Well,
the mask off.
yeah, I agree. Much more efficient, cleaner fuel. Um, where can people follow you? Where would you like to direct them?
Oh, nice question. I have LinkedIn is probably the best place. That's where I do most of my writing. I post most days on LinkedIn, Angela Cox, MCC. You can find Purseda 360 on LinkedIn as well. And we have a YouTube channel. It's fledgling, David. New YouTube channel for Purseda 360. So you can find me there as well. And obviously we've got the website, purseda360.com.
Excellent. We'll put those links in the description. It was a
Uh,
pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you, Angela.
oh, you too. You're really welcome. Thank you for having me.